Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now back in 2015 there was a void in the mid-range GPU market, a price point that remained untapped between Nvidia's GTX 960 and 970 as well as AMD's R9 380 and 390. November of 2015, almost 10 years ago to the day in fact, saw that price point plugged. This is the Radeon R9 380X, with prices starting at $229 or £185. It was a solid choice for 1080p and 1440p gamers. It's interesting to look back at the old reviews of this 4GB card. VRAM comes up quite often. Some concluded that the extra cost and memory over the standard GTX 960 for example was worth it, but others were less convinced. The 380X only came in 4GB models, so there's no need to weed out the lesser equipped cards if you're buying one on the used market, and what's more, these are really cheap. I paid £28 excluding postage, just shy of $37 US. Sure, a slight increase to the budget will probably get you an RX card instead, but I wanted to show you what this could do today because I think given its age and considering driver support stopped years ago, with Windows 11 missing from the driver page altogether, is quite surprising. I have the Gigabyte Windforce G1 card with fan stop, meaning the dual fans will stop under low load and temperatures. It has a 190 watt TDP and requires power from a single 8-pin connector. I'm not doing anything special today, no custom drivers or tweaks, though there was one change I had to make to the registry a little later on, and we'll get onto that. But let's see this cheap, decade-old GCN 3.0 GPU in action. I have it paired with my i5-12400F and 32GB of 3200MHz DDR4, a modest but fairly modern config that will allow us to get the most out of this thing. Now the first game we're testing is Arc Raiders. You may remember if you watched yesterday's one that we tested this using this card because it cost me less than the game. In fact, this card has cost me less than most of my Steam library, to be honest. Now with Arc Raiders the textures just won't load. I mean, they don't pop in eventually. If anything, they start to pop out and we get less and less textures as time goes on. All in all, it's a pretty solid experience in terms of gameplay alone. If you don't mind a few missing trees, fences and basically everything else, but you want to get, say, close to 60 FPS or even above it, then 1080p with 70% res scale and the lowest settings is not a bad place to be. We can still tell that it's Arc Raiders, of course, albeit with some pretty hefty visual sacrifices. I'm just running around here, not really doing much, just exploring the map, trying to pick up some loot, and the frame rate is holding pretty steady, but I imagine when the action heats up, things may get a little more sluggish, though I think you're still going to see a pretty solid frame rate from this aging card. Next up, I tried Cyberpunk 2077, and we really have things like FSR and other upscaling methods to thank for this thing's prolonged longevity, to be fair. Now, XeSS is also an option, speaking of upscaling, but that is not worth turning on because it just creates a pixelated mess. This is the case for basically any game with the R9 380X. If we run anything that supports XeSS and we turn XeSS on, it's going to turn into a pixelated mess, and it's going to run with about sub 20 FPS in basically every instance. FSR 3 is obviously a lot better for that reason alone, and here in Cyberpunk with the lowest settings, FSR 3.0 set to quality, we were hitting 45 FPS, which I don't think is bad at all. Now I think it's a bit pointless to try and hit 60 frames per second across all of today's tested games, especially the more demanding ones, because you're going to have to make too much of a visual sacrifice. We could probably do it here if we set FSR to like ultra performance, but to be honest I don't think it's worth the drop in visual clarity. I'd rather target, say, 40 FPS with a game that I can actually see what's going on like we can here. Fortnite is a pretty easy one. I think we got a driver warning, but to be honest, it's running in performance mode here and it runs just fine. Now there are two performance modes. We have the DX12 performance mode, which this seemed to default to, and we have the Legacy, I guess, performance mode, which uses DX11. Now I did try and run this in DX12 mode, the normal mode, and just set things to low, but it wouldn't let me. Every time I restarted the game just defaulted to performance rendering instead, which I think, you know, makes a few sacrifices here and there in the name of higher frame rates. And that is something that we achieved here. The frame rate was well over 100 FPS. We can also choose DX11 mode, whether we choose performance or not, but that's going to stutter a lot more, at least from what I found when using this card. So far it's not bad at all for this 4GB decade-old GPU that is, to be honest, quite outdated and obviously unsupported. I do wonder how certain games would benefit with Linux, or at least differ, how the performance would change there, but maybe that's something we'll have to try as part of a cheap Linux build. Now I want to include Battlefield 6 here because some of you may be looking at this and thinking, well, this shouldn't be running at all. You get a driver warning with this one, but unlike a lot of the other games, we can't simply bypass it. We can't just click proceed with a warning. We actually have to go into the Windows registry and trick the system into thinking, or trick the game into thinking, that it's using a newer driver version than it actually is. It just involves like copying and pasting a few numbers. I cannot remember where I saw how to do this, but I think it was on a Steam forum, possibly Reddit. I will leave a link down below if I can find it though, because it could be helpful if you're using an older card like this. Now the game will just refuse to run, obviously with the older drivers. It just says that your drivers are too outdated, it's going to run like crap basically, and I guess some may say that's true to an extent. It actually runs a lot better than I thought. I was thinking, well, if the game doesn't want to run, then maybe it's going to be like 30 FPS at best, you know, like 15 to 20 FPS most of the time. But if you don't mind making a few visual sacrifices like I've done here, namely in terms of the resolution scale, we're looking at 60%, then you can hit at least 40 FPS and it's going to feel somewhat okay to play. An outdated, unsupported GPU running Battlefield 6, not bad, regardless of how it looks. Counter-Strike 2, of course, posed no problem, 1080p with the lowest settings. Now, by default, when I chose the low preset, it did enable FSR. That actually made things a little bit worse from what I could see, so I just turned that off. Even so, we were looking at over 150 FPS, about 157. I tried to take a few guys out with a sniper, but just like my gameplay with basically every other weapon in the game, it was pretty terrible, did not go well at all. Performance-wise though, yeah, it held up pretty nicely, pretty consistent overall. This 4GB GPU isn't doing too badly at all, and running quite cool as well. It does get a little bit noisy, but nothing too concerning. Not jet engine levels by any means. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 also has support for FSR 3.1, it also has the dreaded XeSS, and I tried to enable that, but again, pixelated mess, about 15 FPS. With a low preset and FSR 3.1 balanced, it still looks quite good, and it runs with over 30 frames per second. We're looking at 38 with infrequent drops, I'd say, towards 30 FPS, and the occasional drop below that. I sort of Grand Theft Auto'd myself a horse, Grand Theft Horse here, and started sprinting around one of the early towns, making my way into the forests, and things held up fairly well with plus 30 frames per second. I think that VRAM is going to become more of a problem the longer we play. As it was, a few of the textures were popping in quite late, most of them, in fact, and then some of them were even popping out again. For Red Dead Redemption 2, I'm using the console equivalent, or the Xbox One X equivalent settings that I saw in a Digital Foundry video a while ago. This is running at 1080p, however, instead of 4K that console delivers natively. In terms of performance, we're looking at least 40 FPS, a quite consistent frame rate along with decent frame times too. The percentile lows were 37 and 33, so no issues here. This is quite an old game now, and when this released, the card would have still been supported. This came to PC in 2019, I believe, so yeah, the card would have still been supported then, so no surprise that it's still running rather well here. Again, targeting 60 FPS probably isn't a good idea, but I'm more than happy with the plus 30 we were getting with this old mid-range card today. And Red Dead Redemption 2 with these settings still looks great. I caused a bit of chaos around Valentine, and even despite me shooting almost all of the NPCs here, yeah, things still held up nicely. Hollow Knight Silksong next doesn't really need talking about in terms of performance, because as you may expect, even with all the settings just set to what I think is their respective highest, we were getting 350 frames per second. The low 0.1% figure of 14 was because as we sort of transitioned between different areas, there was a slight spike, but that was it. Apart from that, yeah, it ran absolutely flawlessly, to be honest. So if you're looking for a game that's going to run really well on an older card like this, well, this is it. No complaints at all from me here. I was going to test GTA 5 Enhanced, but then I thought we may as well stick with the Legacy version. I think this one still has more players at the time of this video, according to the Steam survey anyway, and it's going to run a lot better here. Now, this is a fairly old game, and it's one that came out, I think, on PC the same year as the card itself, so this gives you an idea of context, I guess, for this GPU. I'm running with the highest settings, 16x anisotropic filtering here. The sliders were set to max, like population density, things like that. FXAA was enabled, but the advanced options were set to off. And overall, we saw over 100 frames per second. Of course, when I started throwing grenades about the place, this did drop a little bit, but I didn't see anything below 60 FPS, so a really nice experience in GTA 5 Legacy here, and the perfect sort of game that's going to run really nicely on a card that costs less than £30 in some instances. With Apex Legends, I chose the lowest settings apart from textures, which I set to high. TSAA was also enabled for 94 frames per second. The percentile lows were also very consistent. This is footage from an online bot match. Simply because I tried to take some footage from an online match, I got wiped out loads of times, and then the footage ended up like corrupting anyway. It must have thought, yeah, you're not uploading this gameplay's terrible, so we'll do you a favour and just corrupt the footage. But yeah, here, as you can see, basically flawless performance, no issues from the R9 380X in this one at all. We will finalise with The Witcher 3. This is the next-gen version of the game. Now, this is another game that originally would have come out, I think, the same year as the card on PC, 2015, and the original version would have probably run a lot better. I did fire this up with DX11, first of all, and although performance was decent, we were getting so many inconsistencies with the frame time graph. It was stuttering all over the place. So even if we're seeing a couple of frames less here, DX12 is certainly the better option. And of course, this card supports that, so it's running here just fine with over 60 frames per second. This is with FSR2 quality. Of course, we get the FSR options as well as other upscaling options when we choose the DX12 version of the game, so that's worth bearing in mind. 64 overall, a 1% lower 48 and a 0.1% lower 41, and the performance was even holding up relatively well as we made our way into busier towns and cities, which is nice. Overall, for the money I paid, the R9 380X, I don't think it's bad at all. Yes, it's unsupported, yes, it's a decade old, but if you're looking for something cheap to play a few of your older games, maybe even a few newer ones with some sacrifices to the visuals, I think you could do a lot worse than this, put it that way, and I'm honestly quite shocked as to how well it did. It's nothing amazing, of course, I think that was expected, but yeah, I mean, considering it cost me less than most of the games that I've tested today, I'm really happy with it, and I hope you've enjoyed watching. Thank you as always, let me know your thoughts down below, leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.